the digital transformation, it doesn't have to be an uncertain thing. It can be planned for in such a way that it is the certain path forward, and it is Japan's path forward to success.
That's awesome.
But just circling back to this concept of 70. So, so first of all, there's this concept that, or this interesting coincidence that 70% of the workforce is employed in the services sector. Now, the other interesting sort of coincidence when it comes to that is that if we look at the potential for digital transformation to improve the economy, it's in 70% of existing companies, which is kind of, goes against the common understanding that startups create most of the value. Right? So we have this sort of understanding that it's monozukuri is really important, manufacturing tangible items is important, or maybe it's starting up a software company, Google, Amazon, Facebook or Apple,
Mercari,
right? Or Mercari, but in reality, those new companies generally contribute only about 30% of the overall economic advantage that comes from the potential of digital transformation.
That's super interesting.
70% comes from transforming existing enterprises.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Good to know.
So if we look at where we should be focusing our efforts,
it's like education almost, or
well, yes, it's retraining. It's in assisting these companies with their digital transformation. So we hear a lot about the word disruption, right? Which I don't like because, first of all, in Japan, it's antithetical to the culture. And nobody wants to disrupt something that's working. What they want is to change it, to transform it into something that will work. So I think it's very important to focus not so much on disruption, but on transformation.
It's kind of, it goes back almost to that removing of uncertainty, where disruption is introducing uncertainty, or sounds, though term is a negative term, that sounds like it would be literally disruptive, which is introducing risk or uncertainty. But I think that the way you're kind of positioning it, and the way you talk about it now, is that digital transformation is really, it's going to be removing that uncertainty. We've reached the point where it's almost necessary in order to remove more uncertainty for the future.
Exactly, and that's what I'm building up towards, that the digital transformation, it doesn't have to be an uncertain thing. It can be planned for in such a way that it is the certain path forward, and it is Japan's path forward to success.
That's awesome,
Thanks for setting me up for that.
That was great, thank you. I'm just
that works.
I'm picking up what you're putting down, Awesome.
So that, that focus, again, on this, this rule of 70 that I've come up with here. So another interesting thing is that if we look at within, so 70% of basically companies in Japan are in the services sector. And the greatest benefit for digital transformation is in, 70% of that potential lies in transforming existing companies. So that tells us that we should focus on the services sector. We should focus on existing companies. Now here's an interesting thing. 70% of the IT professional workforce is not employed on site.
Oh, interesting,
It's employed in systems integrators.
Oh, interesting, okay.
So if you are working in a Japanese enterprise, say you're that 60-year-old CEO of a Japanese enterprise, you work in the services sector and you know that there's great potential to transform your business. You only have 30% of the overall engineering workforce in your company. The rest is outsourced. It's outsourced to the systems integrators of, let's see, it's by rank, I think it's Fujitsu, NEC, NTT Data, those companies. Those are the top three. I might have got the order wrong right now, but they're the top three largest in Japan. So it's actually those companies that need the most help. Now, the reason they need help is, first of all, they employ most of the IT professionals in Japan, and there's a huge lack of IT professionals in Japan right now. I think the recent stats were that we're almost at a lack of 300,000 right now. and by 2030 it will double to 600,000.
Wow.
So right now we need another, more than 250,000 IT professionals, and that's not just engineers. That's people who understand how to use the interfaces to utilize, for example, the CRM or the ERP that we mentioned earlier, simply to be able to log into a system and log your data in a digital format rather than doing it all with handwritten forms and processing by files and folders, right? So that's a good area to focus. That's telling us where we should focus our energies. And I've got one last 70 metric, which is interesting. Yeah. So this one is about half of work in Japan right now is repetitive work. It's data entry, it's document processing, 70% of which can be automated.
Yeah, that's interesting. Nice. Yeah.
So that tells us where to focus our energy. We should be looking at the services sector. We should be looking at existing companies. We should be looking at the systems integrators, and we should be helping with automation. So if we want to help the Japanese economy, the overall GDP, that tells us where we need to focus, and automation is the key that we need to focus on. So automation in the white-collar world actually means AI. This is why I believe that over the next 5 years, in the common parlance in Japan, we're going to stop talking about IT and we're going to talk about AI for everything. It's one way to look at it is the cognitization of the working world. We're going to take everything, anything, take X and add AI to it. Whether it's your semiconductor, chip-enabled PET bottle that knows where it is on the shelf and when it needs its brother to come and replace it, or whether this, this mic in front of us here is an IoT interconnected device and making seamless connection to the other devices to aid us with these sort of tasks, recording and so on. Or look at, it's happening right now. This digital transformation is happening right now. The DX is now. If you look at the top 10 companies on the mother's market right now, we've got a whole cadre of interesting companies who are taking, again, the services sector, which incidentally overlaps with the small and medium-sized enterprise sector. Most of these are pretty SME businesses. All of those provide some solution for that either SME sector or the services sector. For example, a recent sort of darling of the investor world has been AI Inside. This is a company that literally created an AI for handwritten character recognition on documents. So not just document recognition, but the wide variety of kanji characters. People write them different ways. Depending on your knowledge of kanji, you have more or less characters that you'll use, and you'll supplement with hiragana or katakana. So everybody writes their forms a little bit different. So to have a good AI that can engage in optical character recognition or OCR, you need something that understands all the different ways that people will write these forms and can process that. Right?
I can really see the value. We just, I just made a pretty large purchase. We bought some air conditioning units. And like watching the guy write out everything we were getting, I was just like, who's going to read this? Like, this is, it's ridiculous. And somebody probably did read that. Yeah, it's like a paper-based process.
Took days to process all of that, right? So it's extremely inefficient. I mean, you don't have to look far to find ways that you can improve productivity.
Definitely, this is,
these other companies on the mother's market right now, another one is Bengo4.com, I think it is. They're working on basically software as a service for legal solutions, and a lot of the documents that are processed in Japan are not done by a lawyer per se. They're done by a shihoshoshi, which is like a administrative scrivener. So that helps with both the digital hanko, as well as document creation, document processing, and then there are other companies that are in like e-commerce and different solutions. Base is an example. It's like the Shopify, Etsy, and Stripe of Japan, all in one single platform that makes it very easy to access. So this also highlights the great advantage that comes in focusing on helping the SI companies with their digital transformation is that most of them are providing legacy systems. Legacy systems like SAP and Microsoft systems, which this contributes to the digital cliff. Many of them are only a few years away from being completely phased out by the organization that created them. Most of Japan's both public and private sector, for example, is still running on either Windows XP or Windows 7. So when Windows 7 is no longer supported, they all need to change, and most of them are not ready to do that. This is why the average CEO sees digital transformation as a cost, not a competitive advantage. The systems that most companies are still running on are such out-of-date sort of legacy boxed systems that the cost to replace them is prohibitively expensive.
And then the retraining.
And you need to retrain, and the systems integrators, these SI companies, are the gatekeepers to those systems. They still, that's their business model, is maintaining those. So it's a little bit hard for them to be incentivized to move everything to the cloud. They have to reposition their business models, but they need to do that. So systems integrator companies in Japan, please move to the cloud.
This is a call to you. This is directly at the camera.
Please help us. Please do your part for the economy as those key, not necessarily shareholders, but stakeholders in society. These companies need to make this change. So this is a call for help to anybody who wants to work in Japan. So anybody who wants to craft their career for working in Japan, these are the areas where you can help. We need highly trained professionals. We need engineers, especially AI engineers. But we also need, let's call them business translators. People who can help those 60-year-old CEOs and their senior management teams to understand how to navigate the digital transformation and help them in that process. Advisors, people who can help with writing out the processes, making the very clear, detailed plans so that you remove the uncertainty and allow these companies to make this digital transformation. We need people who can help with that. Obviously, a part of that core skill set would be to speak Japanese. Business level Japanese would help a great deal. But some companies have English-speaking team members who can help and aid with that sort of liaisoning. But we need more case studies. We need to get to this tipping point where the private sector has shown readiness and appetite, desire, and understanding of the necessity to engage in digital transformation, and has started creating great examples of companies who've been able to do this successfully. Which will then enable the public sector to be able to both engage in their digital transformation and help to set the goals, the initiatives, and create more awareness, more top-down direction about how to do this. Now, to that end, we have a great development that's happened very recently in the creation of the digital agency. So we're speaking in 2021. The Prime Minister is Prime Minister Suga. Not very many people know Mr. Suga's background, but it's actually very fascinating. He's an entrepreneur.
Oh, I didn't know that at all.
He is a self-made man, as it were.
Really?
He worked his way up from pretty sort of menial jobs when he was starting out his career. He worked his way up in business, and then he shifted over into in the political structure. So he understands the needs of businesses, and his entire campaign, his entire flagship project was digital transformation. He's our guy. He's been sidetracked and almost derailed by the pandemic and the necessity to roll out the vaccine, which has been completely undermined by the lack of digital readiness. So if his mission of creating the digital agency had happened sooner and things had been a little bit more ready, it wouldn't have been as dire in Japan. But this was his initiative, and he has been able to move it through to get the legislation in place. So in September, there will be the creation of this new digital agency. The minister of this agency will be Minister Hirai. Very, very interesting person as well. There was a great interview with him in English with the CEO of Rakuten, Mikitani-san. Where they sat down and they talked about the importance of this mission. And Mr. Hirai, he's been on a road show to raise awareness of digital transformation and what's going on, what they're trying to work on. And he talked about the pandemic and how this has raised awareness. And there's a great quote by him. He basically said, I'll paraphrase him here, but he said that until now, until the pandemic, most people in Japan thought that Japan was doing fine with digital transformation because they were numb to the processes, these bureaucratic processes of having to fill out all this paperwork. Here's an example. I recently got approved for a mortgage, building a new house. And that was months of paperwork. And applications and reapplications and supplemental information and trying to understand everything about my career, which is not a typical Japanese salaryman, right? So a lot of uncertainty there. So just months and months and stacks of paper to remove uncertainty about who I was as a mortgage candidate. And multiple different government offices that I had to go to.
Literally.
So it's not like you can go to one place and submit your papers. You have to go to multiple different government windows and talk to a dozen different people and stamp all these different forms.
Nothing's digital. Also, it's literally
7% of it is digital. I don't have the figure written down. It's something like of the 56,000 different government processes that exist right now, 7% of them have been digitized.
Oh man.
And that's it. But that highlights the issue. But the Japanese populace wasn't aware of this until the pandemic. So what made people aware of it is seeing how long it took Japan to, first of all, roll out testing. We're at the stage right now where the vaccines are the big sort of the big point on everybody's mind. But first of all, it was testing. It was PCR-based testing. First of all, the slowness and the lack of clear communication and the lack of a good roadmap about how to do the testing, and then it was the vaccines. There was this misunderstanding that there weren't enough vaccines, and until all of a sudden there were. And now there have been all of these logistical bottlenecks about getting vaccines to the right communities so that everybody can become vaccinated. As of today, when we're talking, 30% of the Japanese populace has been vaccinated, which now puts it on par with the UK and several other developed nations. Still behind, in overall vaccine readiness, still behind China and the US and other nations. But there's daily confusion about the process because it is all analog.
Paper-based,
So you have to apply, you have to go to the city office to get your application to receive a vaccine, and then they send you the paperwork.
I just got my
to
coupon.
Fill out. Right, you get your coupon to go fill it out, and then that office doesn't actually know what its stock is because they have to fill out acquisition papers in order to get the stock of vaccines. Because of the actual daily usage of that then has to be reported by paper. There's such a delay that the communities don't know what their actual stockpile is.
They don't know which hospitals also are offering the vaccines. You have to kind of do the research on your own to figure out which hospitals are actually offering. It's like,
it's a massive amount of confusion. So the digital agency has been created to create a bureaucracy populace interface, an interaction between the population and the government. But before it can even do that, it had to create an intergovernmental, basically operating system for digitization. Because during the past 20 years where Japan has attempted to undertake digital transformation, there hasn't been enough momentum with a clear enough policy that the bureaucracy could make that change. So what's happened is each individual agency has made that change. So they're all on different computing systems. They all have different terminology for what things like the cloud are and how to use them. They have no inter-bureau interaction capability, and this is one thing that is always sort of hobbles Japan's overall bureaucracy, is that there's a lot of infighting.
Yeah, that's fair.
It's just the nature of Japanese politics that there's constant sort of stakeholder battles about different policy initiatives, and individual agencies in Japan are extremely powerful, and so they have their own ways of doing things. So the digital agency is first of all coming to standardize everything, to standardize initiatives like how to move away from paper. Last week there was a big article in the Hokkaido Shimbun, one of the major newspapers, talking about how there had been a top-down initiative, a politician-driven initiative, to get the bureaucracy to completely move off of fax machines into email processes. I think it was by next month was the deadline. And this article was talking about how there had been a massive backlash against that. The bureaucracy saying, it's impossible. We cannot do our work processes by email. We must use the fax machine. Now again, we're speaking in 2021.
What are those processes like? Yeah, just what are they faxing? Like, I don't even, who's receiving those? It's just between the offices. Like, it's so
well, it
surreal.
is. It's literally office to office, faxing. Some of it, maybe you could walk down the hall and just physically give it to someone faster than you could fax it to them. But these processes, it's not impossible. These processes, other OECD nations have been doing these processes by email for over 20 years.
Literally,
it is not impossible. They just don't understand how to do it. So there needs to be more education.
I really feel that,
There need to be these like business translators that can help navigate. Now, part of the concern, again, it's this uncertainty avoidance issue where, the bureaucracy, they're concerned about moving to email because they hear about emails getting hacked and cybersecurity and privacy concerns. They're probably unaware of the fact that one of the easiest hacking entry points is a fax machine or a printer. It's actually much easier to get, because most of these are internet-connected devices with an IP address, but they're usually open, and it's the easiest entry point. So it's actually more insecure to use a fax machine than it is email. But there's no awareness about that, right? So there's an understandable, very empathetical concern, uncertainty about how to engage in these processes. So that problem must be solved. And the digital agency was created to solve that. So their primary initiative is this inter-bureau communication and education, the creation of what you could broadly call trust services. So trust services are how do you engage in time stamping of documents so you can track that they are the correct document and that it hasn't been altered somewhere in the process. Digital seals, digital certificates to authenticate both documents and websites. Personal seals for individuals and then corporate seals. And then aligning all of these trust services with other governments.
Is trust services a term from Japan? I don't know if I'm familiar with that before.
I'm very sorry, I've forgotten his name, but it was coined by one of the government's advisors who gave a talk to the American Chamber of Commerce in Japan, the ACCJ, about the digital agencies initiatives. He's a professor, and I'm sorry, his name escapes me. He coined it in a talk that he gave to the ACCJ a couple of months ago about what this digital agency is going to do. And he coined the trust services
It's a good term.
phrase. It's a good term, right? Because it humanizes, or it helps you understand, oh, so this is what they're doing. They're creating the services that will allow us to trust these processes, right? So the main bulk of that is the government working within itself, the different agencies communicating. The second part of that is the ability to communicate with other countries, with the EU and the US will be first. So document handling protocols with other governments. And then the last step will be the government populace interface. And that is going to happen through the MyNumber Card, which is like a social identification number. In Canada, where I'm from, We have what we call the SIN, or the SIN card.
Yeah, Social Security number.
Social Security number, yeah. You start working, I think it was 15 years old when I got my first SIN card, and that tied things like, pension contributions and, health care and identification as well. I mean, you could actually use that to identify yourself. Most other nations have that in place. Japan doesn't. At the start of the pandemic, I think it was 21 or 24% adoption of the MyNumber Card by the entire populace in analog format.
Yeah, I have. Oh man, that's super interesting. I had no idea it was that low. I think that was one of the first things I got when I moved to Japan. Like, I got my residence card, got my MyNumber Card. It's so interesting, though, that you bring it up, that it's also not digitally housed, because when we went to the States at the beginning of last year, my daughter didn't have we only had an American passport for her.
Right.
And they basically told us that, like, if she left, my daughter, who was like under a year old, she couldn't come back in unless she had her MyNumber Card, like the physical MyNumber Card, or had a Japanese passport. And so we ended up, like, I think maybe that person who I was dealing with was a little bit harsh, because when we came back, the guy at the immigration was just like, yeah, just go to the office and make sure to get it, and just by 90 days, you have like 90 days to do this. But when we were leaving, we were freaking out, like, oh my God, like, and it was, yeah, we never carry the MyNumber Card because we don't want to lose it, and it's really it's really paper based. Yeah.
So it's no mystery that things like a vaccine rollout have been rough in Japan.
Yeah, exactly.
Because this is a country, a society that must have clear processes in place in order to do anything effectively, and they're not in place. There's all this confusion, miscommunication, and lack of processes, and it's not just one agency to the next. It's even one individual to the next within the bureaucracy who is not clear on the processes, right? So the solution to that is to have wide adoption of the MyNumber Card. The initiative right now is to have 100% of the population using the MyNumber Card by 2023, and then to digitize that, so you can tie everything together. Yeah,
I just got the notice from my bank to register my number with my bank, so that I could. I don't even know what the services are that would provide. Yeah,
it's actually so that the government can give you money.
Oh. India, I had no idea, actually. Yeah.
And the use case, the killer app, as it were, for the digital agency and the creation of a MyNumber Card was the subsidies that were paid out to businesses affected by the pandemic.
That makes sense. Yeah.
So this was a huge debacle that shone a spotlight on this issue when the first lockdown happened. The volunteer lockdown happened. And many businesses were completely disrupted. There was the equivalent of about a $1,000 US payout that was given as a subsidy for those businesses. But it took 3 months for them to get it, because it was so difficult for them to process the paperwork, the application, and although the funds were available, the local governmental agencies or even the local government, the city office, could not process those and then pay them to the individual's bank accounts, right? So what you want, of course, is to have all of this interconnected and for the government to be able to give you money and tax returns and all of these different things. And then for your ability to go and do something like an address change online or perhaps at a computer terminal, a kiosk or something at the city office in 5 minutes instead of the 1 day and 3 different governmental offices that takes right now, right? So massive increase in productivity will come by the government moving to these digital services. Now that's going to create the necessary standards, these trust services, as well as the sort of authorized protocols for the public sector. And once that's in place, then the private sector will follow. The businesses will understand this is how we go about engaging in use of the cloud. Japan does not have its own cloud, so this will be based on AWS or GCP or something like that. But it leads the pathway forward for that.
Perfect.
All right, so that brings us up to like where we are right now. The creation of this digital agency is a huge change factor. We're moving ahead with digital transformation. We're getting these necessary building blocks in place. But we still have some work to do, and this is how we can do it. Okay. So again, this is a call to anybody who wants to assist with the digital transformation. This is how we can help. If you want a career in Japan, if you already live in Japan and you want to assist with this, or if you want to come to Japan, and coming to Japan is becoming increasingly easy because of business investor visas and this new ability to transition from a student visa to a part-time investor visa. The government is opening this up, and once we can travel again post-pandemic, once we have things like vaccine passports in place, which ideally are reciprocal with other nations, so they mean something, and they're not paper-based but digital. Once we have all that infrastructure in place and you can come to Japan and get into work, this is where you should work. AI, first of all, for SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises, which for the most part will be in the services sector. So it's things like improving these bank loan applications, applying AI to the financial sector, anywhere where there is white-collar work that has repetitive processes that can be replaced by AI. That's where you can help, and that's where you should focus your career goals. Now, if you're a Japanese person, already mid-career, you need to focus on retraining. If you're that 60-year-old CEO of a Japanese corporation, you also need to focus on retraining. Now, here's an interesting statistic. The countries in the OECD that do best with digital transformation and adoption of new technology to drive their economy have a workforce that's currently being retrained at a level of 50%.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So if you look at the developed nations, this is the leaders are actually in the Scandinavian nations. Half of the workforce is undergoing retraining. So companies are creating retraining programs on site, and their employees are engaging in retraining.
Nice.
Right? And this is obviously a massive change factor. What is it in Japan?
I can't even imagine. Probably 16% is my guess.
Not too far off. It's 35%.
Okay. I was pessimistic then. I'm glad to hear it's better.
But you've accurately through your anecdotal evidence identified a problem, which is that most people in Japan cannot get retraining because they're already working such long hours. The work is already so inefficient. If you say, okay, go get retrained, where are they going to have time for that? They're already massively overworked.
It's like when, this is a rough analogy, but like when kind of you've gotten so overweight that like you can't exercise anymore because it'll put you at risk for a heart attack. So it's like we're so deep in the hole.
But there is a late mover advantage when it comes to adopting new technologies, adopting AI, and engaging in digital transformation. There's actually a late mover advantage.
Interesting.
In that you get to skip over things like landlines and the need for a computer and the need to program the AI yourself, and you get to skip right to being able to use these processes on a mobile through a very user-friendly interface because it's already been programmed.
That's totally fair.
Case in point, recently I thought I better learn about AI for myself. And so I spun up a container on AWS, Amazon Web Services, and I used their transcription service. I think this is called Amazon Transcribe. But it's an AI that you can train to understand the vocabulary that you commonly use, the names that you use, your own pronunciation, and so on. So every talk that I've done, every video that I've got on YouTube, every article that I've written over the past several years, I'm feeding into this AI. And then I'm taking all of that transcript and putting it into another AI, which I'm not going to give away because it's my secret weapon, which engages in sentiment analysis to group topics together, and I'm using that to write a book.
Wow, that's amazing.
So, trying to practice what I preach here.
Yeah, exactly.
And none of it was that hard because I didn't have to code anything.
Yourself,
I can code a little bit, but I'm no engineer. But I could use basically a drag and drop mouse click interface to use this AI. And now I'm training my little AI assistant. It's like a pet, you give it, the more information, the more data you give it,
like
the smarter it gets.
Digimon. Yeah.
And so it's very accessible.
Yeah.
We're at a point now where we have cloud computing in place with the ability to access meaningful neural networks with the GUI processing, the GUI processors that we have now. We're at the point where we can engage in machine learning at scale, and now it's just a commercialized, almost commoditized product. So anybody can utilize AI to solve some of these workflow issues, and you can very easily start a company that will solve these issues, or you can be an entrepreneur, an innovative thinker, and apply these solutions to your own company to engage in digital transformation and achieve this massive potential economic increase.
Nice.
So I think that's where we are right now. The future looks bright. There's a clear path forward, but we must focus on retraining.
Perfect.
We do see examples of retraining. Some companies are aware, but it's still, again, it's 35% of employees are currently being retrained. That's compared to the OECD average of 40%. It's low, and the truly advanced nations that are taking advantage of digital technologies are at 50%. So that's the key right there. We need to retrain the workforce. Even if you're in your 60s or 70s, you should be getting retrained on how to use these services right now, and the barrier is not that high. And we need to, that is the mission essentially, is to get alignment across government, across these retraining services, inter-organizational retraining programs, as well as training companies that do this as as their business model. Like here in Tokyo, Code Chrysalis, for example, that's a great company that helps people to learn with coding boot camps and relatively short programs. They can get reskilled. This is what we need. This is the way to solve this problem. It's mission critical, but it is a solvable problem, and I think the path to do that is quite clear.
Yeah, and it can lead to a lot of growth in the future. So, awesome. I think that's a good place to put a pin in it for now. Next time, I think we can cover maybe what this means globally, and then also maybe some cultural aspects that kind of led to this.
Sure, it would be good to talk about that, because anybody who solves this problem right now in Japan is solving a problem for this, AI and automation as a way to counter a declining population. If you solve that now for Japan, you're future-proofing your career, right? So if you do that for the next 5 or 10 years in Japan, the Scandinavian nations are all facing the same issue. South Korea has the same issue. North America has the same issue. You will become an expert on digital transformation, application of AI and automation to solve this problem. If you do it now in Japan, you're not taking anyone's job away with automation. And in 5 to 10 years, you won't be doing that in those other nations either. AI is going to come and create more jobs than it takes away. Automation will create more jobs than it takes away in the 10-year, looking at a 10-year roadmap. So
perfect.
The future is bright.
Yeah. So let's definitely talk more about that next time. I hope to have you back pretty soon. I think that this could be a really interesting series, and so it's a good starting point, and let's expand on it next time.
Yes, looking forward to keeping it going.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Evan. We appreciate it. I'll talk to you again soon.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Thank you.